Hello, everyone, and welcome to not just another episode of Lords of Limited. We've got the murders at Karlov Manor Crash Course. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, Mr. Ethan, Private Eye, Sachs. Ethan, are you ready to do some detective work and solve the murders at Karlov Manor and tell the folks what the best archetypes are in our Crash Course?
Yeah, I've got the format solved already. But Ben, because this time I'm competing in the Pro Tour, I'm going to be giving some misinformation in the theme of the format, of course, the flavor of the set. I will be sending people down some wrong paths.
So, Ethan, no more lies, Sachs, after the PT?
That's right. After the PT, no more lies. Before the PT, there might be some lies. No, I will be full transparency here on the podcast. You know, if the pros want to cheat and listen to our show, they're welcome to do so. And that's as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, they probably need every edge they can get against you, so I imagine they will be tuning in.
For limited? Yeah, I would think based on past
Our Pioneer
experiences.
chats, they might be entertained by that.
Yeah, they're like, oh, this sweet summer child thinking that he can de-sideboard Yorian. Yeah, they might be getting a kick out of that. But limited, you're going to want to tune in. So yeah, so we've got the Crash Course, a ton of stuff to get through today. Last week I joked about, maybe this will be the first time our preview episode is longer than the Crash Course. I think that would be nearly impossible looking at the number of grading differences and different top 3 and top 2 commons and uncommons we'll be taking a look at the end of the episode. So if you've never joined us before for preview season, we do things a little differently around here. We are going to be going through big picture stuff to start. We're talking about stats, how creatures match up against removal, looking at some archetype support, some things that largely shape a limited format like life gain, sweepers, mana sinks, fixing, and then we'll get into the grading scale, and we'll get into having graded all the cards, which we won't be doing on air, but we have done separately. We've graded all the commons and uncommons individually, and that'll be in a spreadsheet where you download the show. You'll be able to get a link to that if you want to follow along at home. And we're going to go through every card where we had a gradation difference of 2 or more, and then we'll get to our top commons and uncommon rankings. And I think it's also worth noting that play boosters, as this is the first set with play boosters, are tweaking things a little bit, right? I'm sure you noticed this as you were going through the full card image gallery. There are more uncommons than commons now, and that's going to be the case moving forward.
That is wild. I didn't notice that there were more.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
It's not like
I noticed that there were significantly less commons. I just did not notice that there were more. There are more total uncommons.
More total uncommons than commons. And I believe that's how things will be moving forward. And we have not yet, as someone pointed out in our YouTube comments last week, we have not yet addressed the list. And I think
we will not be moving forward.
We will probably not be moving forward. So the way the list works is it's a small pool of cards, I think something in the 30-ish range, that is pulled from in some number of boosters. And I think they said it's on average 3 cards per draft pod. So that is largely insignificant in my mind. So I think for this set, we'll say we're going to approach things basically the same going into it. And we will learn through the course of Murders at Karlov Manor, like what we may need to switch around next Crash Course season. But for now, I think we're going to approach things largely as we've been doing them. I don't think those changes are going to greatly impact what we'll be doing here.
Right, and not that we won't talk about the list cards at all in future episodes,
Oh,
right?
no.
If there's a list card that's a banger build around, you better believe we'll be telling you how to draft a deck around it, just like going into the format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like don't want to give those cards equal weight as like the commons and uncommons, because you're just going to see the commons and uncommons so much more than those list cards. Any other housekeeping stuff in terms of prepping people for this episode that we need to get into before we get into our usual housekeeping?
I don't think so. I am jazzed to talk to you about murdering some folks at Karlov Manor.
I am too. First things first, let's get into a couple of our usual housekeeping. Let's chat about the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. The show will always be free. We have some great perks over at the Patreon. Everybody who gives back via the Patreon gets access to the Lords of Limited Discord. It's hopping, it's popping, 24/7 limited tech support. You know, you can ping me and Ben. We're there, but like I often say, we're like proud papas at this point, and we've let the Discord graduate off to college, and we definitely are there. We're present, but you know, it's got a mind of its own at this point, and it's a great mind for sure. So if you're looking for that kind of a community to dive into a new set, highly recommend the Discord. Great perks as you move up the reward tier rankings. Get access to the show a day early, ad-free, if you're interested in that. Get access to our show notes if you want to see the show in written form for episodes like, 50 takes or the Crash Course. That's really a nice, valuable resource if you don't have the time to, go back and re-listen to the episode, whatever. Those written notes are an awesome resource. And even monthly coaching sessions with me or Ben if you go all the way up those reward tier rankings. So if any or all of that sounds of interest to you, you can check that out. And we, of course, want to welcome our new patrons the first week that they join. So this week, we're welcoming Pips, Joshua, Sharp Capper, Eastus, Audrey, Derek, Reagan, and Trevor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. Show is also brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., coolstuffinc.com, where they've got cool stuff in stock. And right now, you better believe that is Murders at Karlov Manor pre-orders. So you need to get your booster box of play boosters on pre-order so that you can get it delivered to your house. Get in the Lords of Limited Discord if you're not already there. Organize a practice draft with your friends, a draft pod, and then you need to report in the Discord directly to Ethan via DMs exactly what's good in pod draft play so that he can crush the PT. We need to mobilize the Lords of Limited Army to do some in-person 8-pod testing, and to do that, you're going to need those play booster boxes, and no better place to get them than coolstuffinc.com. No more putting booster boxes in the closet. You got to crack these open, report the findings in the Lords of Limited Discord so that we can get Ethan to 3-0, 6-0 those drafts at the PT. And please, when you make your purchases from coolstuffinc.com, use that checkout code LOL, all caps, to get 5% off anything in the store that you order, as well as let them know that we sent you over there.
Boom. All right, let's get into the stats. First, we're going to look at what number/percentage does specific removal hit of the 97 creatures at common or uncommon. And as far as I can tell, for the first time ever in Crash Course history, there is not a single thing that targets 1 toughness creatures specifically. There's no... I did my due diligence via Scryfall and the full card image gallery, and I couldn't find a 1 damage 2, -1/-1 counter until end of turn. I think X1s are free and clear.
They're running rampant. They're going to take over the format.
Yeah, so...
It's a new day, a new time. I mean, Thopter tokens are kind of going to punish them a little bit, right?
Sure. I mean, if you want to trade your 1/1 flying token with my whatever 2/1 or 3/1 on the ground, go for it. Have at it. But I think, a card that I'm super high on, Dog Walker, that's the Boros hybrid common flip. It's a 3/1. And if you undisguise it, that can't be what we're going to say, right? Are we saying undisguise?
When you reveal it.
Ooh, reveal. When you take off the mask, Scooby-Doo, and I would have gotten away with it, etc. But if you undisguise it, it gets 2 1/1s as well. Like, those are just excellent, right? I thought already, I was like, I'm pretty high on this card, but now seeing that there isn't really a lot of stuff or any stuff that targets 1 toughness creature specifically, I'm even higher. So 19 creatures with toughness 1, that's 20% of the creatures at common and uncommon.
Yeah, love it. That takes us on to X2s, where we've got Shock, a classic, red for an instant, deal 2 damage to any target. There are 26 creatures with toughness 2, which brings us up to 46% of all of the creatures in total that Shock is going to hit. It seems like a pretty darn good deal. I would imagine Shock is going to be quite strong in this format.
Correct. Yeah, and I didn't count, I just counted creatures at their face value here, and I didn't count, there's 2 non-creature spells with disguise. There's a land and an artifact that I didn't count here as like 3 mana 2/2s or whatever. That takes us on to X3s. First up, we have a banger of a removal spell, Galvanize. 1 and a red for an instant, deal 3 damage to target creature. If you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, it deals 5 damage to that creature instead. So we'll see that again in just a minute.
We've also got Case of the Burning Mass. This is 1 red for an uncommon case. When it ETBs, it deals 3 damage to target creature and opponent controls, and then does some other stuff. But basically, we were worried about that 3 damage when it ETBs.
And Lightning Helix is back, of course. Thank you, Randy Bueller. Red-white for an instant. At uncommon, deal 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. There are 23 creatures with toughness 3, which brings us up to 70% of all the commons and uncommons.
That is excellent. All 3 of those cards, I think, are going to be quite strong. I mean, Galvanize and Lightning Helix, obviously great, but pretty excited about Case of the Burning Mass as well.
I know you are.
Moving on to the X4s. First up, we've got Suspicious Detonation. Speaking of cards I am not excited about. It's 4 and a red for a sorcery at common. Costs 3 less to cast if you've sacrificed an artifact this turn. So, I mean, like, going to be doable. But basically, this is a blue-red gold card that I think you're hoping to pick up kind of late. It can't be countered, and it deals 4 damage to target creature.
Classic, common, clunky, big red removal spell. And we also have Soul Enervation. This is 3 and a black for an enchantment at uncommon. It has Flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. And it also says whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life.
That card looks excellent to me. I love Soul Enervation.
Yeah, so that's 15 creatures with toughness 4 in the format, bringing us up to 86%.
And the X5s, we've got Galvanize here. This is 1 in red. Again, we've seen this instant deal 3 damage to target creature, but if you've drawn 2 or more cards, it does that 5 damage mark instead. So maybe you're cracking a clue and then galvanizing something and shooting them down for 5 damage.
And those are 9 creatures with toughness 5, brings us up to 94%, leaving only 4 creatures with greater than 5 toughness at common or uncommon. A couple of other things we wanted to check in on. One was power 4 or greater for a card called Make Your Move, just 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. There's 24 creatures at common or uncommon that have power 4 or greater, which is 25%, about a quarter. That's usually what we see. Honestly, all of these kinds of breakdowns are about what we expect to see.
Yeah, I think I like Make Your Move starting in the sideboard, seeing what we've seen here personally.
I agree.
It takes us on to mana value 3 or less, where we've got Long Goodbye. This is 1 in a black for an instant at uncommon. Spell can't be countered, and it says destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. So great way to pick off all those disguised creatures as well as just other small critters running around.
Right, and so that's 52 creatures, not including other disguise, right? Because creatures with mana value greater than 3 that have disguise could fall in this category as well. So you're going to be able to hit probably a little over half of the creatures with Long Goodbye. I think initially, before seeing that, I thought this card was a little, I don't know, lackluster, but I think I'm in for Long Goodbye.
Oh, I think that card's quite strong. Yeah, love Long Goodbye.
So in the spreadsheet where you can see all of our card grades, you can also see a tab for combat tricks and a tab for removal. Wanted to throw out a couple of noteworthy things about removal. One is, you may have noticed, like, often we have way more cards to discuss that deal with specific toughness. I mean, as I said, we had none for X1s, only 1 for X2s, like usually. Black has something in there as well, maybe even 1 at common and uncommon. There's going to be, a big clunky thing in red or whatever. Like, we just didn't see a lot of things caring about specific power and toughness from the removal, and that's interesting. Another huge interesting thing for me was a lot of things happening at sorcery speed. 13 out of the 22 removal spells are sorceries, which is higher than I feel like we're used to seeing.
Yeah, and might make the instant speed stuff like, Galvanize even more premium than it would normally be.
Correct, yeah. White seems to be getting a bit less than usual. That's also partially because there's some hybrid stuff and multicolor stuff, right? There's more multicolor cards in this set, even though it's not really a guild set. We are back on Ravnica, so we have multicolor cards at common. We have multiple multicolored cards per color pair at uncommon. And so I think that's part of it. We have some hybrid colors where white's getting some removal spells. Both of green's removal spells are bites. That's a pretty big upgrade, I'd say. Like, usually at least one of them is a fight. The fact that these are both just reach out and hit something, I think, is big. And then blue doesn't get a ton either. It has an enchantment removal spell at common and one of those, like, sort of put it on the top or bottom of their library card at uncommon.
Yeah, blue's enchantment spell at common, breaking the color pie. There's been some scuttle about that on Twitter and in the old Discord.
Well, didn't you see? I tweeted something about the Arena Cube, and someone told me that the game is largely spiraling out of control because of power creep in design. So power creep, color pie, bleed. The days are numbered for Magic the Gathering. It's over.
I mean, we called it. The draft is dead with play boosters, right? I mean,
exactly.
You heard it here about 6 months ago, folks.
Some things that we didn't count in the spreadsheet, that didn't count towards this removal stuff, that aforementioned power 4 or greater, basically anything that was narrow like that wasn't quite removal. Counter spells is a lot of how blue interacts. Didn't count those, bounce spells, etc. But I think instant speed removal, I think all the removal, or I think a lot of the removal seems quite efficient to me. Like it's low on the curve, partially I think because of the ward 2 on the disguise creatures. But I think you're right about my ears are perking up a little bit about instant speed removal.
Yeah, love it. All right, that takes us on to taking a look at new and returning mechanics and maybe how well some of those supported, which seem to be some of the best archetypes based on the support we've seen, and just all sorts of stuff like that. So first up, we've got Disguise. There are 30 cards in total with Disguise, spread largely evenly across the color pie. So, you would think like that Naya would maybe get a little more of that than Blue and Black based on the archetype descriptions, but it generally is broadly even across the color pie. And the gold commons are definitely the best of the disguise creatures. The hybrid casting cost to flip them up, those have been, I think, by far the most impressive disguise cards looking through the spoiler.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, red, green, green, white, white, black, those are the ones that are billed by Wizards of the Coast as the disguise colors. They don't really get better disguise creatures than the other color pairs, which is awkward. Like some of the best common hybrid ones are not even those colors. So
Right.
like the other decks are maybe going to benefit from having some of the great hybrid disguised cards, as well as just better cards in general. So on the lookout for that. Green does get some really good uncommons that disguise. I think that is one of the things that stuck out the most to me. So we've got a couple payoffs here for disguising, one of which I know you're excited about. We've got Sumala Sentry. What's going on there?
It's green-white for a 1/3 with reach. Whenever a face-down permanent you control is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it and a +1/+1 counter on Sumala Sentry. I mean, that's a huge bonus. You get do this once. This gets a counter and another thing gets a counter, right? Like that is a lot for, you don't even have to pay. It's not even like, oh, and you pay 1 or pay 2. It's just free. That's huge.
It's an anthem for your team.
It's an anthem for your team. Thank you. Yeah. The other card we have is actually an anthem for your team.
Yeah, this is Greenbelt Radical. This is 3 and a green for a 4/4 uncommon with Disguise 5 GG. And whenever it's turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and creatures you control gain trample until end of turn.
Yeah, that card seems like a beating. Next up, we have red-black Suspect. So as a reminder, if you suspect a creature, it can't block and it gains menace. You can have multiple creatures on your side of the battlefield with Suspect. Doesn't have to just be one like a ring bearer. There are 16 cards that have or interact with Suspect, primarily in red-black, right, which is where we would expect it to be. And we have a payoff here, which I am pretty jazzed about. It was hard for me to like wrap my head around as I was grading by myself the other day. What do we got going on as the signpost uncommon?
This is Rune Brand Juggler, black-red for a 2/2 at uncommon, and when it ETBs, you suspect up to one target creature you control, and it has the ability 3 black-red, sacrifice a suspected creature. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn.
Where'd you land on Rune Brand Juggler in your head?
Quite good, right? A pull into red-black. I mean, a B-,
Yeah.
I think you're primarily interested in ETB suspect something, and then the fact that later in the game when you have more mana or maybe you need to get a key blocker out of the way, you can chuck one of your weaker suspected creatures at your opponent's stuff is all upside.
And this can interact with itself, right? Like you could just drop this on 2. This has menace. Sure, it can't block, but if you're on the play, certainly you're thrilled to have a 2-mana 2/2 menace. And then later on, you can just sack itself to give something -5/-5. That's a lot, and it feels like it only gets better from there.
Right. It's a very versatile 2-mana play, which is a very strong card in Limited these days.
Mm-hmm.
A question I have for you about Suspect is how do you think it's going to affect gameplay? I saw some chat in the Lords of Limited Discord that maybe it was going to be a 2 ships passing in the night kind of thing, and that was going to affect gameplay negatively in the format. Any fears for that for you?
Oh, I don't know. That's really hard for me to say. I'm gonna just trust. I trust, right? We trust in R&D that things are balanced. Why would we not trust in R&D that things are balanced?
I lost some faith last format.
I know. We all know, Ben. We all know. But we're looking at brighter ships ahead here. There's a card I wanted to throw out there that, like, I think for me, partially like why I wanted to talk about Rune Brand Juggler, and I'm going to talk about another card here right now called Caught Red-Handed. Is just I'm feel like I'm just going to need to see this stuff play out. Like what's the prevalence of it? Because I don't feel like it's, flooding the format. Like it's largely concentrated in one color pair. So it's not going to come up a ton, I don't think. So 2 ships passing in the night doesn't seem right to me, but they're just hard cards to evaluate. So Caught Red-Handed is 4 and a red for an instant. The spell can't be countered, and you gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste, suspect it. So this is a 5 mana, threaten effect, but instant speed. And so the sick thing about instant speed threatens is they attack with a couple things. You steal one of them, untap and block, and it's a 2-for-1. Not the case here, right? With caught red-handed, because you've suspected the thing, and so you can't interact with it that way. But I don't necessarily like. I think there have to be reasons, and maybe it's just because they're dealing with instant speed and a new mechanic that they've made this look so clunky. But I've been just trying to think about how this plays out. Like, what one big question when this was previewed in the Lord's Limited Discord was, why is this an instant? Right? If you can't do the ambush thing, what's the point? And there is something interesting about, like, specifically if you're racing with this card, right? Where that you get to, your opponent thinks they're racing, they're attacking with some stuff and leaving some stuff back. And you get to say, no, actually, one of these, I'm going to fog one of these attackers. And now it can't block, right?
Literally
Something like
couldn't
that.
block because it was attacking.
Because it couldn't block against attacking. I guess that's a bad example. As you can see, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around this card. And maybe it is just bad. But like, I think largely I'm just interested in how Suspect is going to play out, because it feels like there is a bit of a two-way player street of like, okay, it's an evasive attacker, but sometimes you may want to make your own thing an evasive attacker, and sometimes you may want to make your opponents whatever. Maybe they have a small death toucher, or you make their, the skullcap snail variant in this format, the black 2-mana 1/1. They exile a card from their hand when it ATBs. You just get to go, all right, I'm just going to suspect that now it can't chump block for a turn. Like, I think it will be interesting how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for Suspect. I was initially, when I read that comment, like, ooh, yeah, I could see that being bad. But then after looking at the previews, like, it's really only red-black. So it's not like you're going to be doing it all the time. And I think as a mechanic, it's really going to reward knowing who's the beatdown, which I think is cool. I think it's got a lot of two-way play. Like you said, I'm excited for Suspect.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to blue-green collect evidence. This is not plentiful, but I do think, I was initially thinking, oh man, collect evidence, another late game mechanic that's not quite going to get there in a format where other stuff seems pushed. But I do kind of think they got there on this with the payoffs, maybe lacking some enablers, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There are 11 cards that have collect evidence, which is not a ton, and they're primarily in blue-green, which we would expect given, the archetype billings, similar to red-black having Suspect. Blue-green is collect evidence. There are 2 black cards also, in addition to blue and green cards, and just some payoffs to take a look at here that we hadn't seen yet. This one looks really strong. This is blue-green for a 2/2 at uncommon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may collect evidence for, and whenever you collect evidence, investigate. Like, that's just an excellent Magic the Gathering card. If collect evidence is going to work, it needs cards like this.
Yeah, that card is called Evidence Examiner, by the way. Yeah, and one thing we didn't point out last week that someone in the Discord sort of illuminated for me is that the split cards juice collect evidence quite a bit, right? You can cast, a 1 or a 2 mana split card and have the other half be 5 or 6 mana, and now you've put something in that easily enables collect evidence 6, right, on its own.
Right, and we've got some other good payoffs here. There's Surveillance Monitor, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 at uncommon, and when it ETBs, you can collect evidence 4. Anytime you collect evidence, you create a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying, which is going to be chump blockers, which is going to give you more time to spin your wheels to collect more evidence. There's another really cool build around in Chalk Outline. This might be a touch slow, but if you get it going, like, could do some serious work. This is 3 and a green for an uncommon. And whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token, then investigate. Like, if this, like, I just wish this had given you that up front. Like, how we've seen some of the build-arounds that, like, do the thing on ETB, and then also when you do this other thing, and maybe it was too good if it did that, so they had to nerf it to this. But I have my eye on that card. I think that could do some serious work. There's another really cool build-around, potentially in black-green at uncommon, called Insidious Roots. It's an enchantment. Creature tokens you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. And whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, which is going to happen when you collect evidence from creatures, you make a plant token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. So it almost seems like the choking point for some of these build-arounds is going to be being able to collect evidence enough.
Right. Yeah.
But there's some really juicy stuff going on in the evidence collecting. I was pretty down on it initially, and I'm kind of excited to try it out now.
I spent more time than I would like this week trying to figure out how Insidious Roots and or Chalk Outline could be broken in Pioneer.
And any lies to report?
No, I will only be reporting the truth, which is that I didn't come up with anything good. So Insidious Roots, the like repeatable creature card leaves your graveyard. Well, you've got Cat Oven, baby. So,
Ooh.
and like, can you do something else? But you just end up building something that is a worse version of Black
Cat
Red
Ever.
Sacrifice, which is already not like a great deck anyway. So sadly, I don't think Insidious Roots or Chalk Outline are going to get there for me for the PT, but we still got a few weeks.
Yeah, and we
Next,
talked about a lot of the enablers last week. Like there's cycling the Topiary Panther, that's the green land cycler. That Fester Leech card looks really strong. Black is an uncommon 1/1. Deals combat damage to player you mill to, and then you can pump it for 1 and a black. So there are some ways seated in here to get things in the yard, also outside of maybe just trading off disguised creatures in combat or things like that.
Next up, we're going to look at cases. Not a ton to chat about here. There are 7 cases, none of them at common. These are all uncommon cases. And these are that enchantment type where like you have to meet the requirement at your end of turn, and then you've solved it. And then once you've solved it, you get a bonus. There's a card that I don't know how good this is going to be, but I'm excited about, called Case File Auditor as the case payoff. Don't roll your eyes at me already, Ben. 2 and a white for a 1/4 human detective. When it enters the battlefield and whenever you solve a case, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an enchantment card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast case spells. So this can just find like enchantment-based removal or whatever, other auras if you're interested in them. There's that like, flash hexproof +1/+0 and flying aura in blue that's really good. But the problem that I see, like, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, you build a cases matter deck with this. The problem with that is that the cases are more often than not like archetype specific, or
Right,
like
they're very disparate
they're
goals.
very disparate goals, right? There's some that are aggressive and want you to be on board, some that like are removal, and so like they're just different things. Some are like detectives matter, which I guess fits in with this specifically as a human detective. But I think the cases deck is probably more meme than dream. But I think Case File Auditor, because it can just find enchantments, is probably just still pretty good.
We're recommending that Ethan's PT draft competitors draft Case File Auditor highly and try to build around it in an effort to sabotage them.
Right. That's true. That's true. We are doing that.
That's what we're recommending on Lords of Limited. That takes us on to Investigate and Artifact payoffs. There are 26 cards that investigate across all colors, which I think just is a heads up that it's going to be a little hard to run out of gas in this format, which has been a feature of a lot of formats lately, but I think worth noting going into the format that maybe might be a little harder to play control as a result of aggro decks also having access to investigate and clues. So there's a couple payoffs specifically for sacrificing clues, one of which is Persuasive Interrogators. This is 4 black for a 5/6. ETBs, you investigate. This is an uncommon. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. That's like a finisher for a blue-black clue investigating control deck for sure.
It's a really interesting card, right? Like, I didn't quite know how to evaluate it, but I was like, I could definitely see a world where like this comes down and is just like, you have an answer for this in 2 turns?
Right, and if you don't, you're dead.
Because I'm just going to untap, crack 3 clues, untap, crack 2 clues, you're dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how the card, I think, will be playing out. And it seems pretty strong to me. Like, I could see building around that. We saw Curious Cadaver last week. This is 2 blue-black for a 3/1 flyer. And when you sack a clue, you return it from your graveyard to your hand. Not great. I'm not super jazzed about that. And then we've got some specific just artifact payoffs that do look quite strong. First up, we've got Case of the Filched Falcon. This is the blue saga that investigates, and then you solve it by
Can't call
controlling.
it a saga, baby. It's a case.
This is the blue case that investigates, and to solve it, you control 3 or more artifacts, and when it's solved, you can sacrifice it to put 4 +1/+1 counters on target non-creature artifact to make it a 0/0 bird creature token with flying in addition to its other types. There's going to be a pretty gross curve out with Case of the Filched Falcon into Gleaming Geardrake, which is the blue-red signpost uncommon. It's a 1/1 flyer, and when ETBs you investigate. So that's going to make you solve the case on turn 2. And then turn 3, you can crack the case to make your clue a 4/4 flyer, and Gleaming Geardrake's going to be getting huge. That start is going to be oppressive.
May I have that
blue-red
at the Pro Tour, please?
Yeah, for real. And then we've got a lot of great enablers here for artifact sacrificing, some of the artifact payoff stuff. There's clues running around everywhere. There's Thopters running around everywhere. This seems like a very well-supported thing to do. Like, not just blue-red artifacts, but investigating in general is its own reward, right?
Speaking of investigating, let's chat about detectives. This is a deck that Ben is very excited about. There are 34 cards that are detectives. They're largely concentrated in blue and white, but there are a couple in black and red and 6 in green and a number of multicolored cards. It looks super supported. We expect it to play out similar to Blue White Knights from March of the Machine, so maybe a little gumption happening here.
Well, and just like going to be, I think it's impossible for this deck to fail. I think looking at the cards that are in it, and Private Eye is just super pushed. This is 1 white blue for a 3/3, gives other detectives you control +1/+1, and when you draw your second card each turn, target detective can't be blocked. This looks like a tempo aggro deck from hell. Like, I do not want to play against this, and I want to be playing it often. And one of the cards we hadn't seen yet that looks super cool is
Yeah.
Thinking Cap. This is 1 for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+2, and it only costs 1 to equip a detective, 3 to equip anything else. Thinking Cap is going to be annoying to play against.
Has real inventor's goggles. I mean, obviously there was auto equip with that. There was improvise with inventor's goggles and Ether Revolt, but Thinking Cap looks really good to me.
Yeah. So really high on detectives. Takes us on to Black White Power 2 or less. This is kind of moderately supported. We've seen a couple new good cards since the last week's episode. Wisp Drinker Vampire is 2 white black for an uncommon. It's a 2/4 flyer. And whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Like, think about how good Vampire Spawn is, right? The 2/3 ETB drain 1, gain 1, or drain 2, gain 2. Like, this is going to kind of make all your creatures into that sort of effect. I can see this being quite powerful. We've
Which
also
is
got,
such a good stat line. It'd be so easy to make this like a 2/3 flyer, and then you'd be like,
and then it
I don't
dies to
know.
Galvanize, right?
Right. But I don't know. Wisp Drinker Vampire seems really good to me.
There's a smattering of other cards. I mean, Black White looks supported through its gold uncommons, but certainly not to the depth of detectives or blue red artifacts or things like that.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, here is Red White Battalion, moderately supported. I mean, I think Red White looks very good to me. And like, you may be attacking with 3 or more creatures with Red White, but I don't think you're like trying to jump through hoops or do anything. This is often what we've seen with Red White. It's not going to be, it doesn't seem like it's going to be very synergy based, but I think it's just going to be like the good Red White cards are going to be good and you're going to play them. And then sometimes they're going to enable you to be attacking with 3 or more creatures, you know?
Yeah, it's just going to be red, white aggro. And again, looks moderately supported through its gold cards.
Takes us on to sweepers, which can be a huge part of a format, right? Ben, can you earmuffs real quick? I'm going to say, yeah, Unstable Glyph Bridge, for example, from the last set. All right, you're good. You're good. No more earmuffs. White Sun's Twilight from Phyrexia will be one. But, you know, if there's a lot of sweepers in a format, then that also sort of shapes how you're supposed to play around or play against certain colors or color pairs. So we have about 4 here. And important to note, no mini sweepers really. Like sometimes we'll see like -2/-2 to everything or whatever. Not seeing anything like that at lower rarity. First up, we have no witnesses, 2 white for a sorcery. Each player who controls the most creatures investigates, then destroy all creatures.
Did you see the discussion about what the most means on Twitter?
I saw it existed. I couldn't bring myself to read over the minutia. Do you have a TLDR for me?
I do not. Next up, we've got Deadly Cover Up. This is 3 black for a rare. It's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you can collect evidence 6. Destroy all creatures. If evidence was collected, exile a card from an opponent's graveyard, then search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So just basically a good old 5-mana Wrath in limited.
Seems good. Then we have Incinerator of the Guilty. Woo, thank God this is a mythic. 4 red for a 6/6 with flying and trample. When Incinerator of the Guilty deals combat damage to a player, you may collect evidence X. When you do, Incinerator of the Guilty deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker that player controls.
Oh my lord.
Yeah.
That is intense.
Yeah.
Some incinerating for sure. Lastly, we've got Ill-Timed Explosion. This is 2 blue-red for a sorcery at rare. Draw 2 cards, then you may discard 2 cards. When you do, Ill-Timed Explosion deals X damage to each creature, where X is the greatest mana value among cards discarded this way. So kind of a variable damage Wrath there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Takes us on to fixing. Quite a few ways to fix in green specifically. Like we don't have any treasures being made in red or blue or whatever, right? So green's going to be doing the fixing, and then we've got a couple colorless options and a few land options. I think the ones to note the best of the bunch for green is Nervous Gardener. I think this is a top, if not the top green common, one in a green 2/2 with Disguise. When it's turned face up, you search your library for a land card with a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Colorless options, I'm not crazy about them. What are your thoughts on Case of the Shattered Pact? So it's a what, Ben?
I am in
Yeah,
on Case of the Shattered Pact.
this was another one that took me a while. So it's a 2-mana case. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. To solve, there are 5 colors among permanents you control. And then if it's solved, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains flying, double strike, and vigilance until end of turn.
This card is incredible.
It
incredible.
is, right? But it's incredible because of the hybrid commons.
Yeah, it's going to be super easy to solve this and not even necessarily be playing some like extravagantly monstrous 5-color brew. Like this just is a great card, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we'll be better in some base colors or color pairs than others because like, for example, I think like 2 of green's hybrid commons are duds in my mind, like the Crocodile and then the black green one. Like I don't like either of those very much. But some colors like red and white, I think, get like mostly all bangers.
Yeah.
Very excited
about the fixing that exists.
Yeah, and then we talked about the lands last week, but there's the Escape Tunnel, which is the sort of pushed Evolving Wilds variant. There's Public Thoroughfare, which has some like artifact synergy because it can tap for a mana of any color, but you have to tap either another land or an artifact when it comes into play. So you have to jump through some hoops for that. But I do think multicolor stuff will be possible if you want it.
That takes us on to Incidental Life Gain, which is mostly in black and white and mostly one-time life gain things. And there's a few ways to gain repeatable life. Do you feel like life gain is going to be a big part of the format? Like going to maybe push aggro out or anything like that?
I definitely don't think it's going to push aggro out. It seems like a little bit of a Goldilocks situation here of like a baby bear just right. Like it feels like it's present. You've got like a handful of instances of like gain 2, gain 3, little spurts. Nothing that seems overwhelmingly pushed. And it also doesn't seem like it's a barren wasteland of no life gain.
Yeah. All right, that takes us on to mana sinks, which are some repeatable or incidental places to put extra mana. A lot of the mechanics lend themselves towards this, right? Clues, great place to dump extra mana. Disguise, flipping your things face up after putting them down, as a 2/2 ward 2.
Those 2 alone, I'm just sort of unclear of how you ever run out of things to do with your mana. Like, I'm going into this format thinking it's an 18-lander for me.
Okay, I think that's certainly a reasonable place to start. Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on what type of deck you're drafting, maybe.
Yeah.
The thing that seems different to me about this format compared to Khans, like that's the obvious comparison, right? With Morph and Khans of Tarkir. I don't necessarily think the Disguise cards are the best cards, the way the Morphs were in Khans. So, and Disguise
it doesn't seem like the format's
going
to start on turn 3, right?
Right, yeah. Like I think the format is certainly starting on turn 2. And a lot of the Disguise cards, certainly those multicolor hybrid cards at common, are best if you play them as gold cards face up generally. That's not always true, but I don't know how much disguising you're going to be doing outside of like the green decks that are really trying to disguise and flip them up per, archetype billing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Beyond those 2 headliner mechanics, we've got equipment, which I do think are mostly bad. Like there's the cycle of clue weapons. I think we'll talk about one or more of those when we get to the card grades. We talked about Thinking Cap. There's Crovad Haunch. That's the food equipment that gives +2/+0. You can sack and then pay, or when it goes to the graveyard, you can pay 1 and a white to make 2 1/1s. And then the usual smattering of, I think we have 3 creature pump, right? Repeatable creature pump on some, fine to good cards. And a lot of the other ones, like there's a bad Tapper, there's a bad Punisher variant, there's a bad creature that animates. It's a bad Punisher variant, Ben. I'm sorry. I'm putting on the boxing gloves early. I don't think you're gonna have to work that hard. If you're like, I want to make sure I don't run out of gas. Well, Clues and Disguise are gonna make sure you never run out of gas.
Yeah. Speaking of the boxing gloves coming off, it's time. We are getting to our card gradation differences and getting ready to get in fights that will nearly end the podcast. Which means we got to go over the grading scale first. This is the limited resources grading scale, the gold standard, A through F. Your A's are your bombs, your game winners, good in many situations, especially when you're behind. Some of the best cards in the set, bomb rares, and hyper efficient spells. Cards like Bonehorde Dracosaur, Polani's Hatcher, Unstable Glyph Bridge, and Breach's Eager Pillager.
Wow, how restrained of you to only put 4 cards on this list. Your B's are strong cards that pull you into a color / make you want to play that color, reasons to be in a particular color or combination of colors. Cards like Lodestone Needle, Thrashing Brontodon, Ruin Lurker Bat, and Waterwind Scout.
Your C's are your solid playables, the meat and potatoes of a limited deck, role player creatures, and normal removal spells. Cards like Cogwork Wrestler, Pathfinding Axejaw, and Tinker's Tote.
Your Ds are sometimes playable, below average, 22nd, 23rd type cards. Cards like Oltec Archaeologists, Malamet Brawler, Shipwreck Sentry, and Thousand Moons Infantry.
Your Fs are unplayables or cards you should never put in your deck, things like weird rares. Stuff like Fabrication Foundry, the Enigma Jewel, Hit the Motherlode, and Tectonic Hazard.
Then we've got some sort of augmentation grades here. One is sideboard cards that don't make the main deck, but when you board them in can be quite good. Examples from the last set are Over the Edge and Malicious Eclipse.
Build around cards, which are cards that don't do much on their own, but when you build around them can be good to great. Stuff like Bringer of the Last Gift, Throne of the Grim Captain, or Abuelo Ancestral Echo.
Man, Throne of the Grim Captain, what a build around. And Bringer, two absolute bangers. We've got synergy cards, which is, it's a slight difference from build arounds, right? They're cards that aren't good enough to build around themselves, but they provide good synergy if they're in the right deck. Cards like Deconstruction Hammer, Market Gnome, Saheeli's Lattice, or Waterlogged Hulk.
And lastly, we've got diminishing returns cards, which are cards where the second copy is significantly worse than the first. So maybe bounce spells like Brackish Blunder, some graveyard reanimating like Helping Hand, or some clunky removal like Ray of Ruin.
All right. Anything you want to say? How many Let Me Ask You This do you have in the tank for me going into this?
I don't know. That's always spur of the moment. I don't have them locked and loaded. They come to me through a flash of inspiration.
All right.
I do feel confident about my grades.
Okay.
I'll say that.
All right, that's going to bring us to white commons. First up, we've got Museum Night Watch. 3 and a white for a 3/2 Centaur Soldier. When it dies, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token, and it has Disguise for 1 and a white. I gave this a C+. You gave this a D+. Come
card
on.
Seems terrible to me. Clunk Central.
No way.
This is a death trigger. This is...
Yeah.
When are you ever excited to put this in your deck in the 4 mana value slot?
I'm not. I don't need to put it in the 4 mana value slot. I can slide it over to the 3 mana value slot where it belongs as a disguise creature.
This belongs in the sideboard. This card is trash.
I think
I was being generous with a D+.
C+ is probably too high. This will be in the top half of white's commons for sure.
I would be hoping, I think, to never cast a Museum Night Watch in this format.
The play pattern of play this on 3. We'll talk about another Disguise 2 that I'm quite excited about when we get to black, which I also created wildly higher than you. But the play pattern of this on 3, flip it up and play a 2-drop or play something for 2 mana on 4, I think is really good. Like, the installment plan of this makes it like slightly less than 4 mana in my mind. And yeah, 3/2 that dies. Like, most of the time, what happens to creatures in limited?
They die, but like, your opponent has so much control over this unless you disguise it, in which case you jumped through a bunch of hoops to make a 2/2 for 2 mana.
The lowest I will go on this card is a C. Like, the D+, this is above replacement for sure.
I disagree.
All right.
Moving to On the Job. This is 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn, and you investigate. You gave us a synergy C+. I gave us a D. Talk me up on this card. It's going to be an easy conversation.
Right. I mean, this is just like, go wide decks are going to want this. Like, you're just going to want 1 copy of this, certainly in your red-white decks, and I think other white aggressive decks as well. And then Investigate tacked onto this is just gravy, though you're often hoping that when you cast a card like this, you're ending the game. So Investigate, I think, is more like icing on the cake than not here.
Yeah, I think I had missed that this was instant speed also. Like, this effect gets way better when it's instant instead of sorcery. I'm coming up to synergy C+ with you.
Mm-hmm.
That takes us on to Karlov Watchdog, which is 3 and a white for an uncommon. It's a 3/2 doggo. It's got vigilance. Permanents your opponent's control can't be turned face up during your turn. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. You give us a synergy B-. I give us a D+.
Synergy B- is too high. I'm never picking this and letting this pull me into a white aggro deck. But like the fact that this doesn't have to attack on its own for it to get to the trigger, right? You can play this and get the trigger from this for your creatures the turn it comes in, plus have it as a blocker. I think that's good. I think probably Synergy C+ is more like it. I don't think this is a pull into the deck, but I definitely think you'll play it.
Okay, I've got my first. Let me ask you this.
Here it is.
You're lobbying for maybe not attack. It's a benefit that you don't have to attack with this to get the thing. Would you play an enchantment with this text on it, or would that be a better card than Karlov Watchdog?
No, that would be. Thank you for the easy. Let me ask you this. No, that would be a worse card than Karlov Watchdog. I'm just saying the fact that you don't have to wait a turn for this is nice. That's a good thing.
Yeah, but like this is anytime this attacks, it's trading. This is essentially a one-time use for a 4-mana card that is almost guaranteed to trade off in combat. I guess unless you have tricks. I don't know. This card again looks quite clunky to me. D+ is probably harsh. I'll come up to like C,
I guess like
maybe.
How different is the? I guess a real. Let me ask you this: is how different is this than? It's a lot different than like 4 mana, 3/2 ETB. Your creatures get +1/+1 until end of turn.
It's worse than that, I think.
Well, can be, but it also can be better than this.
Yeah, but
more often than not, is it going to be worse? Probably.
The Watchdog seems not good to me.
All right, I'll go down to like Synergy C.
That takes us on to blue, where we have no common differences. We're moving straight to the uncommons.
Blue's commons don't look great to me.
Blue's commons never look good, and then they're always broken. That's always
fair.
How blue goes.
That's fair. Okay.
I feel quite fine about blue's commons. So moving on to blue's uncommons, we've got Case of the Filched Falcon. This is the case that is the artifact build around that we talked about earlier. You investigate, then to solve it, you control 3 or more artifacts, and then you turn something into a 4/4 flyer after you've solved the case. You gave us a C+. I gave us a build around B. I think this card is going to be oppressive in blue-red artifacts, and I think you are going to want to pick it highly and build around it in that archetype.
I'm in for that. I'll tell you what I missed. I mean, not before recording today, but definitely missed my first read through, was that it gave the thing flying. I just sort of assumed it was the 4 counters on an artifact thing. I was like, yeah, that's all right. But giving it flying too is amazing. Yeah, I'm in for build around B. I cannot believe we have to talk about this. It's the annual. Let's talk about the Curiosity variant. Curious Inquiry is single blue for an aura at uncommon. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, investigate. So just to be clear, in Wilds of Eldraine, I'll throw out the grades. I gave this a D, you gave it a C, which is actually tempered for you. In Wilds of Eldraine, where Curiosity was in the Enchanted Tales slot, and we argued about that, that was only good when you put it on what was it, the 05 pinger?
The catapult, yeah.
The catapult. This solves all of your problems because there isn't a pinger and it says combat damage. And you don't even get the card immediately. You have to pay 2.
You have to pay 2. But imagine putting this on a disguised creature when you're on the play. It's got Ward 2. You're going to get in.
Like, I think we got to be careful. First of all, we have to be careful about telling anyone other than other Pro Tour competitors to put Curious Inquiry in their deck. But we also have to be careful about equating Ward 2 as hexproof, which I think we're dangerous. Like, I think a lot of times as I'm like gearing up for arguments, I think you can just be like, well, Ward 2, how could you ever possibly kill something with Ward 2? It's like, well, you actually, there's quite a few tools in the format to get around the Ward.
There's some cheap flyers. I mean, I just like this effect more than you. You have talked me down on it. I will probably play Curious Inquiry like twice all format.
No, you're going to play it once. Like the first time it connects, you're going to be like, taste it, Ethan.
That's exactly what I'm going to say on stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I stick with my D here. Next up, we have Surveillance Monitor. We talked about this already. 3 and a blue for a 3/3. The Dalkin Detective. When it enters the battlefield, you may collect evidence for. Whenever you collect evidence, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. I gave this a build around B-. Give this a build around C-.
Yeah, I'm too low on this card. I graded this before I had done the research on all the collect evidence cards. I'm a little
Hmm.
more optimistic on this card at this point. I don't know if I'm like B minus
Yeah,
optimistic. I think it's more like C plus, and maybe it's a synergy C plus rather than like you're going after building around it because of a surveillance monitor. But I think once you are in for collecting evidence, I think you're probably in for doing some surveilling.
the truth is going to be how often you get this up front. Right? If this is a 4-mana 3/3 plus a 1/1 flyer that has the potential to create more 1/1 flyers, it's amazing. That's
Right.
probably not happening on curve very
It
often.
could. I
It
mean,
could though, and so that's the
certainly.
thing. Like, so I think this could be a build around B
Yeah,
if
that's
there's
fair.
actually the
If
support in the build around life of this to have this enabled by turn 4.
Yeah, I'm actually in for build around B minus, I think.
Great. Are you
Cautiously optimistic about
are
that
you in
card.
for my next grade of build around OMG?
I love that brought a smile to my face. I saw this card and my jaw dropped and I was like rubbing my hands together. This is Living Conundrum, 4 and a blue for an uncommon elemental. It's a 2/5 with hexproof, not Ward 2, actual factual hexproof. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, skip that draw instead. As long as there are no cards in your library, Living Conundrum has base power and toughness 10/10 and flying and vigilance. This looks sweet.
So I'm really jazzed about this card, except for two words or three words, I guess. Extract a confession, the common edict, which by the time you have no cards in your library and can turn this into a 10/10, your opponent can easily collect evidence 6 and make you sacrifice your 10/10 flyer.
That's very sad. I'm a
So
little deflated.
I know. So the fact that that exists makes me a lot, because I was thinking like, oh, what a cool twist on the like, if you draw no cards, you win the game. It's not quite that, but it's a really cool payoff for limited. I'm also not convinced that like decking is a thing very often in this format. Like there doesn't seem to be turbo, like the mill stuff seems actually desired by a lot of drafters because of collect evidence and because there's not a ton of it. So I don't know, one, how easy it's going to be to enable this, but the fact that you get a 2/5 hexproof to for your troubles along the way as you're trying to, not end, or as you're trying to get the game to go on as long as possible is something. I'm going to stick with build around B because this is my kind of card, but I gotta say, I think I hope I don't see this in the PT draft because I'm worried it'll just derail me.
Nah, you got to go for it. Put your money where your mouth is. I like build around B as well. A little less excited now that you brought up the Black Edict, but card's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Got the juices flowing. Next up, we've got Black Commons. First thing here is Slice from the Shadows. This is black for an X spell. It's got an instant, can't be countered, and target creature gets -X until end of turn. I
Yeah,
give us a C plus, you give us a C minus. This is just a good clean removal spell. Scales with the game. It's like never going to be excellent, but it's never going to be bad either.
that's fair. Do you feel like this has diminishing returns? Or you just think this is good?
I just like this as a removal spell, and it also can like
I
if
know
you're
you
choked on mana, kill things via combat trick-esque stuff. Like I think it just has a lot of modality going for it.
right. The nice thing is you're even trading on mana with disguise creatures, right? Because this gets around the ward ability.
Mm-hmm.
C minus is probably too low. Yeah, I'll come up. Next up, we've got an oldie but a goodie. Murder is back. 1 black for an instant. Destroy target creature. I gave this a B. You gave this a C plus. I won't make you give your hot take here. We can wait till we get to your top commons. But I think murder's just good. I think you're leveling yourself a little bit by giving this a C plus.
It's 2024, Ethan.
I know
Your boomer's showing.
my boomer is showing. No, I have to cover up. My boomer is showing. No, my boomer isn't showing. Murder is good. You're out of your mind.
Black. It's very hard to cast. I don't know.
Here's what I'm gonna throw down to you, or maybe I'll wait till we get to the other card. I'll wait. Oh, I gotta let me ask you this locked and loaded.
Okay, but here's what I will say. I think Murder will be good in exactly blue-black control. I think that's going to be Murder's home.
Okay.
Next, we've got Agency Coroner. This is 4 and a black for a common, 3/6. It's got the ability 2 and a black, sacrifice another creature to draw a card. If the sacrificed creature was suspected, draw 2 cards instead. You gave this a Synergy C+. I gave this a D.
It's Bushmeat Poacher. How can you not like it? It's Bushmeat Poacher for 1 more mana plus
For
2 more mana to activate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like this card just it blocks basically everything.
Okay, so what archetype are you excited about this in? You're not excited about it in black white. You're not excited about it in red black, which is presumably where it goes because it cares about sacrificing suspected
Why am
creatures.
I not excited about this in red black?
Red black is suspect aggro. You're gonna want to
That's what
like.
you are you drinking the Watsy Kool-Aid, Ben?
I
You're
am
letting them tell you what the archetypes are doing?
such a lemming.
Wake up, sheeple. Red black is a control deck. You're probably right. Synergy C plus is aggressive. I don't know. My curiosity is piqued. I'll go Synergy C minus.
Well, that card looks totally homeless to me.
Next up, we have Basilica Stalker. It's 5 and a black for a 3/4 vampire detective with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, you gain a life and surveil 1, and it has disguise for 4 and a black. I gave this a C plus. You gave this a C minus.
I like this card. It just costs 6. Like I can see like your opponent flips this up and you're like, well, crap. Like this is a problem. But like
I feel like you're not. I'm worried that you haven't quite calibrated to evaluating these cards as like Mr. Cons of Tarkir over here. It's a morph.
yeah, a morph that is not particularly exciting.
Right, so C plus is probably aggressive, but like I don't know, repeatable life gain and evasion is quite good, and I think 4 toughness is going to kind of matter, like dodging, galvanize, etc. Or I guess dodging, galvanize some of the time, I should say.
So the question I've got for you again is like, where do you want this? Like black white, presumably not thrilled about it.
Why not?
Black,
Oh, because it doesn't have 2 power?
it doesn't have 2 power or
But it
less.
does when when I disguise it.
It does when you disguise it. I guess blue black, this is not great at stabilizing you. Black red doesn't seem quite aggressive enough there. Black green, like it's not really doing anything there.
This is fine. Like, I guess I haven't taken that extra step, partially because I feel like, how can we take that extra step of like, what deck is this going in? And like, I don't see the archetypes as being so linear. Like, we sort of ran into this looking at the signposts last week. Like, some of them certainly will be like blue-white detectives it's doing the detective thing. I'm not sure I see the archetypes as being so like pigeonholed of you have to do the thing the signpost is telling you to do. Like
Yeah,
blue
I
black
guess what
doesn't have to be control.
it's got a lot of good tools to do control, but certainly, yeah, certainly some flexibility there. I guess the thing that the reason I'm grading this lower is I do see some very linear archetypes, right? Like blue red looks very linear, blue white looks very linear. Like this does not do anything to help stop those archetypes, and it's expensive. Like it's hard for me to think I'm going to want a Basilica Stalker at 5 or 6 mana. Like, will I play it? Probably, but
Right,
probably
but
unhappily
that's
too.
a C
Like
minus is what you're talking about.
that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Like I see that this is a reasonable Magic the Gathering card, which is all of the things you're seeing about it. But it's hard for me to imagine wanting it for a deck or needing it for a deck. And to me, that's below a C.
Yeah. All right. You've talked me off the C plus ledge. I'm coming down.
You're gonna have to.
You're never talking me off of
the
this.
ledge here as well.
No.
So next we've got Night Drinker Morai. We're into the black uncommons. This is 3 and a black for a 4/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you lose 3 life. It's got disguise, black. You gave this a B.
Yeah.
I gave this a D.
This is our biggest difference, right?
I hate this card.
This card is incredible. Play this disguised on 3, unmorph on 4, plus have something to do with your 2 mana, attacking with a 4 power flyer on turn 4. Like, I cannot, like, that's not a D. I refuse to accept that. Like, that is a very good card. That's a really good card, Ben.
This card dies to a sneeze, an absolute sneeze.
All right.
After disguising it and then flipping it up. I don't know, man. Like, so you're basically never playing this for 4 mana face up, or things are going.
Or things are going well.
Yeah, I guess. Sure, you don't mind losing 3 life if you're ahead to play a 4 mana 4/2 flyer, but like I'm just worried about this for the stat line. Like imagine if your opponent shocks this. Like you're so behind on tempo.
You know, you have the ability. You don't have to flip this up into their open mana if you're so scared of removal. You know. You're out of your mind if you think this is a D. I think you're crazy. Like maybe it's not a B, but you're just like the ceiling on this card begs a higher grade than a D.
That's fair. I'm probably looking at all of the negatives.
Never.
Maybe it's a C. Maybe it's so hard for me to imagine like this pulling me into black, and like I'm certainly willing to be wrong. I think I will know the moment this gets flipped up against me on turn 4, as you're describing, and I'm like, well, crap. That's probably when I'll feel right or wrong about it.
How could you ever see that happen? Like you're not going to have shock every time when that happens against you.
Any removal spell, right? Like the fact that you've gone, you've skipped turn 3 and then hampered your turn 4, and you're like, this feels like all your eggs in one basket to me.
Nah.
And like any interaction
we're talking about
with your
playing
opponent,
disguise creatures as skipping turn 3. This is heresy. This is lies and slander and heresy. I can't deal with this.
I'm sorry. How I feel.
Okay, that's fine. No budging.
It's getting tense, and we're only in black.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's not going to get better with this next terrible card, Slimy Dual Leech. 3 and a black for a 2/4 leech. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control with power 2 or less gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. I gave this a D+. You gave this a Synergy B-. Who cares about this card?
I do. It seems much better than Night Drinker Moroi to me. I like that this comes down and immediately does the thing, like is going to make a 2 power or less thing difficult to block. I think you're going to be excited to cast and play.
How is it difficult to block? You make your disguise thing
a 3/2
Death Touch, and I block it with my thing that already could trade with it. This does not make something difficult to block.
But there are some good evasive flyers also that this is going to be able to
one
pump.
Extra damage. Attached to your
some of them have lifelink.
4-mana 2/4. This card is abysmal. I wouldn't need to use such strong language, but I'm all fired up from the last card.
I don't know. Now, let us know in the YouTube comments, folks. Who's right and who's wrong? We need a Twitter poll. Which is better, Night Drinker Moroi or Slimy Dual Leech?
Yeah, okay. I'll take to the streets after we finish recording. Last up, we have Polygraph Orb, 4 and a black for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. 2 tap. Collect evidence 3. Each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card or sacrifice a creature. I gave this a D. You gave this a build around C.
Yeah, this card's bad.
Yeah, this card's really bad.
It's bad, but I love it anyway. I mean, I'm gonna be trying to cast some Polygraph Orbs and probably lowering my win rate.
Yeah.
As a result, this card is not good, but I love this style of card, so I'm gonna be trying to make it work.
Okay, so for folks who are competing at the Pro Tour in Chicago in a month, take Polygraph Orb to see what happens. Moving on to red. What do we have in the commons?
We've got The Chase is On. This is 2 and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +3/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. Investigate. You gave this a D. I gave this a C. I like this card, I think, because it basically says, it's a little expensive.
Yeah.
But it basically says you win the combat. For sure, like barring your opponent having, instant speed interaction or whatever. And then you're going to get a 2-for-1 out of the Investigate. Like, I think all that added up, like the fact that if you set up the situation, it has, what was the trick that turned a thing into a 4/4 draw card? Like, it's not as good as that because you're investigating instead of straight up drawing a card, but it is reminiscent of that to me as a trick, like where you're going to be able to get a 2-for-1 a fair amount of the time out of it if you want.
That comp is interesting to me. I had been thinking that this was just too expensive as a combat trick. Like, it felt like it's like Sure Strike, but because they wanted to tack on Investigate, they made it a mana more. It's like, that's not good. But the comp to like whatever, Majestic Metamorphosis and the like that's interesting.
Like, and I don't know that every aggressive deck is going to want it, but I think like if you put it in the right style of deck, it's going to feel kind of deflating when you land it.
Yeah.
If your thing trades up, kills their good thing, and you get a clue token, it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. By that, I don't know. Yeah.
It's going to keep the attacks flowing for red-white, is what I think. Like, I think you're just going to be able to play all your red-white derps and then attack with impunity because they're going to be tapped out because you're being aggressive. And
Right.
it's really going to let things trade up and keep the gas flowing.
Okay, I keep my eye on it. You're kind of selling me.
Right, next we've got Knife. This can be a short conversation. This is red for an artifact, clue, equipment, uncommon. As long as it's your turn, equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has first strike. Equips for 2, and you can sack it to draw a card, as you can do with all the clue equipment. You give us a D+, I give us a synergy C. I think we're saying essentially the same thing there. I just like this because it's in the artifact colors a little bit better. I think the clue equipment in blue and red is a little bit better than the rest of the clue equipment.
Knife and the candlestick. Yeah, I think I'm just feeling like you don't have to stoop to this level of card in those decks.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't love it.
All right, here we go. Case of the Burning Masks. 1 red for a case. When it enters the battlefield, deals 3 damage to target creature an opponent controls. To solve 3 or more sources you controlled dealt damage this turn. And solved, sack this case, exile the top 3 cards of your library, choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. I gave this a C, you gave this a B. Here, we talked about this last week, and so I don't know how much we need to get into it, but the fact that you have given this a B and you've knocked Murder for being black at instant speed and kills anything, but this, you're like, oh, I'm in for deal 3 at sorcery speed because if I jump through some, not large hoops, but some hoops, I get an extra card.
I mean, hoops get me going. I love trying to jump through hoops. Yeah,
there's
a little bit of cognitive dissonance there. I'll give you that. Okay. I'll come down to what, C+?
Yeah, this is a tough.
B's too high up.
It's a tough sell for me. Like, I don't think you're cutting this from red decks, but I definitely don't think this is a high pick. And I think there's a handful of commons you're taking over it, which I think puts it in C range for me.
Okay, I'll buy that.
Takes us on to green. First up, the age-old argument about a mana dork, Tunnel Tipster. 1 and a green for a 1/1 Mole Scout. Taps out a green mana, and at the beginning of your end step, if a face-down creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Tunnel Tipster. I gave this a D+, you gave this a C.
I mean, I don't feel super confident in my C grade. It feels hard for it to be worse than that. Like the curve of this into a disguised creature, turning it into a 2/2, into maybe another disguised creature plus flipping up a disguise thing for 2 mana. Like on that next turn, on turn 4, you'll have 5 mana because of your Tunnel Tipster. Then it's a 3/3. I don't know. Like I could see some decks that really care about having this card that want to ramp towards their bigger disguise things. I think green big disguise decks are going to be interested in Tunnel Tipster, and it's going to be a key part of the deck there.
Yeah, maybe this is like a synergy C. I could see this in exactly like green-based oops all disguise decks. Maybe I can get into it there. Because like I was thinking, like, how often is this? Like I was knocking at 1 because it awkwardly doesn't curve into disguise, right? Like you play this on 2 and then you play a disguise on 3 and you're leaving a mana on fire.
But then it attacks as a 2/2 with a lot of upside, right?
Not on that turn, though.
Oh, it's at the beginning of your end?
Yeah.
I missed that part.
So, but if you do like get a couple Tunnel Tipsters in play and you're going like disguise, then disguise, and all of a sudden your 2 mana dorks are 3/3s when the dust is settled, that's definitely something. So I don't know. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I don't love this card.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I missed at the end of your turn. I'm a little lower on it after realizing that.
All right, that's going to take us on to the uncommons. What do we got going on there?
We've got hard-hitting question. This is single green for a sorcery at uncommon. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. I give us a B. You give us a C+. This card is incredible. It costs 1 mana, and it's a punch spell, not a fight spell.
Yeah.
This is tempo beating.
Yep, I'm coming up to B as well. This card's great. Next, at the top of the curve, we've got Glintweaver from 1 mana to 7 mana. 5 GG for a 3/3 spider with reach. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. Or sorry, just 3 target creatures. You can boost your opponents if you want. Then you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. I gave this a C-. You gave this a B?
I gave this a B. This is the type of card green's been missing. Just like Honey Mammoth, reach, gain some life, stabilize you against the aggressive decks. Glintweaver looks very good to me. I think green loves a card like this to try to stabilize into the late game. I think collect evidence decks are going to love this. Imagine you already have, like, this costs 7, right? So imagine you've curved into some big dumb morph like the 6/7. You put 3+1/+1 counters on it. It's got 10 toughness. You gain 10 life. Like, and then you have this like you're stable Mabel.
You were
At
already
that
stable
point.
Mabel with a 6/7 reach. Like, what are you
Right.
talking about?
I don't know. Buffers the life total. I love a warm, safe feeling, and Glint Weaver is
That's
going to provide that for sure.
I know, but 7 is so much more than 6. Like if this
It gets those
was
tunnel tipsters in your deck, baby.
two bad tastes that taste bad together. I'm probably too low. Like this is probably closer to Honey Mammoth or whatever Lindworm than I'm
Maybe this isn't a
admitting.
B, but this makes me want to draft a green late game deck.
Really?
Like, if you're getting this 5th pick and like you're not seeing much else in the packs, like you're taking this and you're moving into green.
Oh boy. Okay. I'll come up to. It's just there are so many cards in a world of it's 2024. Your boomer is showing in a world of like so many cheap threats plus the flexibility of disguise. It's just so hard for me to imagine taking finding a pack where I want to take this.
I like the look of this card. I mean, like, I don't think that it is necessarily going to be a tier 1 archetype, but you're not always going to be able to draft the tier 1 archetypes. And the green decks are going to want an effect like this very much, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye on it. I think C- is too low, but I don't know. I'm like, I can go up to C. It's so hard for me to give this a C+.
You can do it. I believe in you. You're going to be pivoting into green for this at the PT. I'm calling it now.
Oh no, Tara, I have to pivot into green at the PT. All right, let's take a look at the multicolor cards, which, like I said, we have quite a few of. There's 10 at common, only one to discuss. Riftburst Hellion, the aforementioned 6/7, 5 red green for a 6/7 with reach, and has Disguise for 4 hybrid Gruul. I gave this a C+. You gave this a C-. The Woolly Loxodon Defender has done a 180 here. I mean, I don't love this card. I'm gonna be honest. I was trying to I would have graded it a little lower. I was trying to think of C+ as like the comp to Woolly Loxodon of like, is keyword large just gonna be good enough?
Yeah, so I think the reason I'm knocking this card is what I'm anticipating from the format, with disguise. So, like, in cons, morphing was the thing to do, right? And
Yeah.
everybody was morphing left and right, so you didn't get punished for morphing. Right now, going into it, I'm kind of feeling like disguising is going to not be great for you on turn 3. That's kind of where my head is at. Maybe that's wrong. And if my head's wrong about that,
But why is
then
that? Because nothing like punishes you for doing it. Like you're trading even on mana, but there aren't like you're not getting woefully outclassed. Like the format seems to have been calibrated so that 3 mana 2/2 isn't like outclassed on curve.
I just think, like, with how, I guess this is where we're viewing things differently. I see detectives and blue red artifacts and the like as just like, if you're playing those archetypes and your opponent is going like disguise turn 3, disguise turn 4, like, I just think you are going to mow them over. And there weren't decks like that in cons. So I'm a little worried about disguising as a plan.
Okay.
That's where my head is at with this grade. I think that's what it's reflective of.
Yeah, I definitely could come down on it to a C or even a C-. I'm not super high on the card for sure.
That takes us on to the uncommons, where we've got Detective's Satchel. This is 2 blue-red for an uncommon. When it ETBs, you investigate twice, and you can tap to make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Activate only if you've sacrificed an artifact this turn. You gave this a C. I gave this a build-around B. I like this card. This card's a great build-around. It costs no mana to do the thing. Like, yes, you're going to be a little...
It actually costs you your entire turn 4.
Right,
because
that's
you
what I was
did
going to say.
nothing on turn 4.
Yes, I agree. It costs you your turn 4. Like, you're a little naked for a turn, and you take a hit, but then after that, you're pumping out a Thopter every turn. It's like a 4-mana Planeswalker that is delayed by a turn.
The cognitive dissonance in this episode is wild to me. I just don't know if you're going to have time to play 3 mana for a 2/2, but 4 mana for 0/0, and then 2 mana for a 1/1. Now sign me up. Like, buddy, how are these two wolves inside of you?
Listen, I'm a complicated man.
Yeah, it's so hard for me. And maybe I'm getting tricked by the mana cost, and maybe this you should think of this as it costs 6, right? So that you can at least do something the turn it comes into play. But like, and maybe I'm also getting caught up in, well, find ways to sacrifice clues that don't cost mana. Okay,
Right.
fine.
Yeah, like blue-red is certainly going to have that, like where you can play this and I think sacrifice a clue the turn it comes down without spending mana. We've seen that there are ways to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I like this is just really hard for me to get excited about because of all of the nothing. It feels like you have to already have assembled your good cards to make this card good. And if you haven't assembled your good cards, this isn't helping you do anything.
Sure. Yeah, it's probably a C+. You're probably closer to the right grade with a C. I just like this card and probably got carried away with the grade.
Okay. Next up, we have Flotsam and Jetsam. This is 1 and a Simic hybrid for half of the split card, and then the other half is 4 Dimir. Flotsam is an instant, mill 3 cards, investigate. And Jetsam is 4 Dimir sorcery. Each opponent mills 3 cards, then you may cast a spell from each opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. I gave this a B, you gave this a C. I just really like this card. I like both halves of this card. I like that this enables collect evidence for pretty cheap and at instant speed and gives you your card back. And I also really like, if I'm licking my chops, seeing something sweet over on my opponent's side of the battlefield that I killed, then I could get that too.
I have a very important, let me ask you this for this card.
Yep.
Can you look at this without singing Poor Unfortunate Souls in your head?
Yes, I can.
I cannot. Every time, like, it just starts going on a loop.
So
I've
funny.
had Little Mermaid since I saw Flotsam and Jetsam, and every time I look at it, just playing on a loop.
This is the big nerd I am. Flotsam and Jetsam is a chapter in The Two Towers. So that's what I think of.
Okay. Yeah, I think B seems aggressive to me. I could see coming up to a C+. Jetsam, it's nice that it exists, but like 80% of the time,
You're
this card
casting
is Flotsam, right?
Yeah.
Like, or 90% of the time.
Yeah,
which
you're
is not
probably right. This is like
a great card.
A C+, I'll go.
Sure, yeah, I would meet in the middle there.
Okay.
That takes us on to Hustle and Bustle. Hustle is it hybrid mana for an instant. Target creature attacks or blocks this turn if able. And Bustle is 4 Gruul for a sorcery. Creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn. You may turn a creature you control face up. You give us a C-. I gave us a C+. I think similarly, you're almost always casting Bustle on this card, but Bustle is gonna end some games.
We haven't gotten to argue about an overrun.
About overrun in a long time.
Yeah.
I know, it's been a while. It's been a couple years.
I'm glad that you get to be reminded that this card isn't good anymore.
No. You get to turn a creature face up also.
But you won't, because you're not playing any disguise creatures.
People will. I won't. People will.
I see.
There are a lot of big green dumb cards that are gonna want +2/+2 and trample.
I am way more excited about figuring out a way to make Hustle worth a card so that then I have a 1-mana way to get Collect Evidence 6 enabled than I am interested in casting Bustle.
That's fair, and I think Hustle's a real card too. I think Hustle being tacked on to Bustle, like, this is a good split card. And I think that ultimately makes this a card that decks that want Bustle are interested in. This is definitely a C+ in a red-green deck.
Definitely a C+.
Definitely. You can't argue with the word definitely. Concede, friend.
It's true. I have to concede. That takes us on to Insidious Roots. I told you, I thought about this card a lot this week. Black-green for an enchantment. Creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. I gave this a build around C-. You gave this a build around B. I just have such an issue with payoffs for Collect Evidence when Collect Evidence is you're already having to enable that, and then it is paying you off. It's giving you a bonus when you collect evidence.
But you could also
but
wait, there's more.
Right.
You could have an O1 plant token too. I mean, build around B is probably a little aggressive here. It's C+ is probably closer again, like where the hard part is probably going to be getting enough Collect Evidence stuff, and then once you have critical mass of collecting evidence, I think you're pretty into Roots, but then maybe there's a choking point on creature cards. It could be a little tricky to put all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see someone break this with like not the perfect storm draft before I'm excited about this card.
That's fair. I'm probably high on it.
Next up, we've got Meddling Youths. We talked about this last week. It's 3 red, white for a 4/5 with haste. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, investigate. I gave this a C. You gave this a B minus. I think I probably should be C plus. Part of what I had an issue with is that I don't think investigate matters on this. Am I wrong about that?
I think you are. I think this
Okay.
is going to feel like Aomer the Riddermark when it comes down.
Ooh.
I think you're going to slam it. You're going to attack with 3 things. You're going to investigate, and your opponent is going to feel like, how can I possibly stabilize from here?
That's a good comparison. All right, you sold me. I'm coming up to B minus. All right, that takes us on to the lands. Got a couple to chat about here. We've got Public Thoroughfare. Probably going to be a rehash of our conversation from last week. It's land enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, sack it unless you tap an untapped artifact or land you control and it taps for any color. I gave this a build around B. You gave this a C plus. I think this is a deck. I think this is giving me Great Halls of the Citadel vibes from LTR.
I don't think I mean, Public Thoroughfare is good, and I was certainly too low on it last week, but I think there is there's plentiful fixing. I don't think this is that unique.
But you don't need to be wrapped up in green. That's the thing, is like Public Thoroughfare lets you do it not as a base green deck.
Sure, but I think you want to be wrapped up in green. Like, green looks like it's got the tools to stabilize and get you to the late game, which is ostensibly what this type of deck wants to do. That's why I'm not as high on it as you, because I'm picturing that deck as wanting to be base green anyway, so I don't think this is that unique of an effect then.
Okay, that's fair. I'm sticking with Public Thoroughfare as a deck.
Next, we've got Branch of Vitu Ghazi. We poo-pooed this a little bit last week, and I think there's a little more to this card than we talked about, so I think worth talking about it again. So this is a land at uncommon, taps for colorless, has Disguise 3, and whenever it's turned face up, add 2 mana of any one color. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases. And I certainly misunderstood this card last week after reading some comments in the Lords of Limited Discord.
So the some clarifications, it is mana neutral, right? Because it flips up, adds the 2 mana, and then it itself is a land.
Yeah, well, and I had said last week it doesn't ramp you. It also definitely ramps you, right? Because you play it on 3 as a disguised thing, and then once you turn it into a land, you are a land ahead, right?
Right. For the rest of the game.
Yes, so it also does, it ramps you and kind of gives you the mana back in some senses. Not really.
It does give you the mana back immediately if you can use it. Like,
if you can use it,
the turn you undisguise it, the turn you flip it up as a land, you will have the 2 mana floating plus it itself as a land. So it will be mana neutral.
Right. So you will essentially have paid 3 mana to ramp at that point.
Correct.
Because the turn prior, you played it as a disguised creature. That's what I'm saying when it's not like free or whatever. You know what I mean? But there's also a play pattern. Like, the most busted thing you can do with it, I think, is flip it face up on your opponent's turn to chump an attacker.
Right.
Like, it can block, get turned into a land, will not die because it's a land now. And then if you can use that 3 mana to maybe play an instant of some variety, like
crack a clue,
could be really powerful. Yeah, cracking a clue. I think there is a lot going on here. I don't know how much better all of that makes the card. I still don't anticipate it being land of the year or anything like that, but I'm potentially interested. Certainly if we think it's an 18 land format.
Right, that's
your
what I was
18th land.
I was just thinking that, like, this could just be, you might just have enough sources where this doesn't feel that bad as a colorless land, especially if it is an 18 land format. Yeah, maybe I just come up to C plus with you. Maybe this card's
there's just a lot going on here, and I think I certainly woefully misunderstood it last week.
Yeah. All right, it's time. The gloves are off, but the disagreements will be a plentiful as we get to our ranking of top commons and uncommons. So we have 3 and 2 for each of the categories, and then we'll chat briefly about some multicolor hybrid commons as well. Starting with white. In the number 1 spot, I have Novice Inspector, single white for 1/2 when it ETBs you investigate. In the number 2 spot, I have the white removal spell at common, Makeshift Binding, 2 and white for an enchantment when it ETBs. Exile target creature an opponent controls until Makeshift Binding leaves the battlefield. You gain 2 life. Talk about power creep. And then Inside Source is my number 3. It's 2 and a white for a 1/1 human citizen. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. I'm already just sort of jazzed about 3 mana 1/1 plus a 2/2. Talk about, I guess I'm gonna have to eat my hat a little bit, my detective's cap a little bit, is that I said there wasn't anything that punishes you for playing a 3 mana 2/2. Well, Inside Source kind of does, because it gives you something to trade off and then leaves behind something, and that something can also do 3 tap Target detective you control gets +2/+0 and gains vigilance until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery.
Yeah, I like those top three. I like all of your cards. White is very deep at common, it seems like.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on Makeshift Binding as a removal spell? Like, pretty darn good, right?
Yeah, it's I mean, for limited purposes, it is Oblivion Ring, that kind of
Gain 2
card.
life.
Gain 2 life, which is push. That's why I said power creep.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I think like deserves a bit more of a conversation because normally the white enchantment removal we're hoping not to play or something.
Well,
I mean, that looks
because this
really good.
you can't like. There's a big difference between that and a pacifism variant, right? Because you can't bounce the thing from underneath it. You can't sacrifice it from underneath it, right? This is just, it's exiled. You got to deal with makeshift binding if you want your creature back.
Right, and there's not like tons of ways running around to blow up artifacts and enchantments. Like there's the black, green, gold uncommon that's really going to punish it. But like, I really like that card. So
Yeah.
my white commons also in the number 1 slot, Novice Inspector. My number 2, different from yours, I have Market Watch Phantom. This is 1 and a white for a common. It's 2/2. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, it gains flying until end of turn. That card seems incredibly aggressive to me, and white also seems like it wants to be incredibly aggressive to me. That's why I put it in the number 2 slot.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like your card. That's the 1/1 make a 2/2 as well. And then I've got Makeshift Binding in the number 3 slot, and could see Makeshift Binding moving up potentially. Yeah. I don't know. White is very strong at common, but looking at the uncommons, white is not as good at uncommon. So it's going to be interesting to see how big of a part the uncommons play, because some of the colors just are banger after banger after banger at uncommon, and white is not that.
Between the two of us, almost every uncommon got a synergy grade. And so you and I already were thinking, between the two of us, that almost all of white's uncommons were narrow in a sense of like, well, only going to go in this kind of deck, and whether that's just aggressive or defensive or whatever, or detective matters. But yeah, I think I felt the same way about white's uncommons. I managed to eke out a couple that I like. I really like the first one. Perimeter Enforcer is 1 and a white for a 1/1 human detective with flying and lifelink. Whenever another detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, Perimeter Enforcer gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Big fan of that card. And then I decided to just give another nod to a cheap threat, Neighborhood Guardian, 1 and a white 2/2. It's a unicorn. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn.
Yeah, I like that card a lot as well. My number 1, also Perimeter Enforcer. I think that card is going to be very oppressive when it comes down on turn 2. And then I'm shouting out a Case here in the number 2 slot. I've got Case of the Gateway Express, 1 and a white for an uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. To solve it, you attack with 3 or more creatures this turn. And when it's solved, creatures you control get +1/+0. This looks like exactly what white decks want to do to me. And as a result, I think it's going to be a super high pick and good in almost every white archetype.
Were you trying to decode like what all of the cases were references to? So this is like Murder on the Orient Express, right? That's what this is supposed to be.
I was not remotely close.
You were just thinking. You were just singing
like,
"Poor Unfortunate Souls" over and over.
Exactly. Yeah, just looping on my head. No,
Never mind.
Not, but I do like that movie. It's very good.
Great.
I haven't read the book, but I enjoyed the movie.
Moving on to Blue's Commons in the number 1 spot, I have Deduce. This is 1 and a blue for an instant, draw a card, and investigate. In the number 2 spot, I have Dramatic Accusation, more the power creep, color pie, whatever violations continues. This is 2 and a blue for an aura. Enchant creature, when Dramatic Accusation enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step, and you can pay blue to shuffle enchanted creature into its owner's library. And then in the number 3 spot, I have Cold Case Cracker, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 spirit detective with flying. When it dies, investigate.
Yeah, I certainly like Deduce, and I like Cold Case Cracker. Dramatic Accusation, I'm kind of out on. It seems very expensive to me.
Wow. That's surprising to me. Okay.
Yeah, not in love with Dramatic Accusation.
I feel like Dramatic Accusation is quite close to, I mean, again, it's so hard to compare cards to cards from other sets, but it's very close to Dreadful Apathy. Remember? 2 and a white enchanted creature can't attack or block, and then 2 and a white exile it. Like,
but that was slow as snot in a format with Escape where like exiling mattered a lot.
Yeah, but theirs wasn't a slow format. Like red white could beat your face. I don't know. I think Dramatic Accusation is not. I think being out on it seems like a take, but that's what we're here for.
Okay. Moving on to my blue commons. Number 1, Crime Stopper Sprite. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2. As an additional cost to cast it, you can collect evidence 6. It's 2/2 flyer, and when it ETBs tap a creature, if you collected the evidence, you stun that creature. Card's going to be incredible in blue-white detectives, and that's going to be the best deck in the format. Those are the takes.
Those are definitely takes.
Next, we've got Cold Case Cracker at number 2. That's your 3/3 flyer that when it dies, you investigate. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is. On the number 3 slot, I've got Out Cold. 3 and a blue for instant. Can't be countered. Tap up to 2 target creatures and put a stun counter on each of them. Investigate. That is going to be the curve-topping nightmare from blue-white detectives.
It's tough to have 2 4-mana commons in your top 3.
It is.
That's a tough look.
I agree, which is why I misunderstood one of Ethan's top commons, and you're not going to hear this. This makes no sense. But I really also like the blue card that is counter a spell unless they pay 2 and suspect a creature. I almost put that in my top commons. It's tough for me to put that over Cold Case Cracker because Cold Case Cracker is just such a solid card.
Yeah.
And I do think Out Cold is more powerful than it, but it would not shock me if that counter spell, unless its controller pays 2, gets in there.
Yeah. What do you got going on in the uncommons?
In the uncommons, there are some goodies. Number 1, I've got Fey Flight. This is 1 and a blue for an aura at uncommon with flash. Enchant creature. When this enters the battlefield, enchanted creature gains hexproof until end of turn. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. And then on the number 2 slot, I've got Exit Specialist. This is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 at uncommon. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. It's got Disguise for 1 and a blue. And whenever it's turned face up, you return another target creature to its owner's hand.
Yeah, I have those same 2, just swapped. I have Exit Specialist 1 and Fey Flight 2. Fey Flight seems pushed to me. Moving on to black. My boomer is showing once again as I have Murder in the number 1 spot. 1 black, instant destroy target creature. In the number 2 spot, I have Extract a Confession, 1 and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may collect evidence 6. Each opponent sacks a creature. If evidence was collected, instead, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. And in the number 3 spot, this is my take of the day, I think. Toxin Analysis. Single black instant.
Ooh.
Target creature gains death touch and lifelink until end of turn. Investigate. I love this card.
So I'd love this card after reading the Lords of Limited Discord or independent of reading the Lords of Limited Discord?
I'm too wrapped up in my 3 Pro Tour Discord testing chats to be checking in on the Lords of Limited takes on spoilers. I got my Pioneer hats on, so yes, this is independent. Why? What's the scuttle there?
The scuttle there is that this is great. Better than Murder, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's Doomblade draw card. Doomblade gain life draw card for 1 mana.
Life draw card and also lose whatever creature you played it on.
Who cares? I think Toxin Analysis is good.
It's very efficient. Like, are you putting 3 Toxin Analysis in your deck, though?
That's what I'm saying. By saying that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think it potentially could be like kind of a deck in a way. Like the way that Staggering Size is also a deck for green aggressive strategies that like you pair this with like some derpy-ish creatures, or you pair this with some suspected creatures that are 2 power that then get double blocked. Like double blocking creatures that have menace into open black mana is really hard when you're just like, oh, I was wrecked.
Yeah, okay. You're kind of selling me on it now in tandem with Suspect. I hadn't put that together. Okay. All right. That's a take. I love it.
Sweet.
All right. Moving on to the black commons for me. My number 1 slot is Extract a Confession. That's the 1 in a black edict. And if you collected evidence 6, they have to sacrifice the greatest power.
I don't know what the bigger take is. That is number 1, or Murder being absent from your top 3.
Listen, my boomer is all covered up, friend. Boomer is locked up.
How do you do, fellow kids?
The number 2 slot, I've got Unscrupulous Agent. This is 1 in a black for the 1/1 at common. ETBs, target opponent exiles a card from their hand. Really like that card. And Slice from the Shadows in the number 3 slot. Black X for an instant, can't be countered. Target creature gets -X until end of turn.
Yeah, wow.
Murder's probably better than Slice from the Shadows, but that's my take.
Okay, I'm into it. What's going on with the uncommons?
The uncommons, I've got Leering Onlooker in the number 1 slot. This is 1 in a black for a 1/3 flyer. You can pay 2 BB to exile it from your graveyard and create 2 tapped 1/1 black bat creature tokens with flying. The card is very efficient.
Yeah, the card's great.
And in the number 2 slot, I've got my boy Festerleech. Black for the 1/1. When it deals combat damage, you mill 2, and you can pay 1 and a black to give it +2/+2 once each turn.
Yeah, no overlap here. My number 1 is Undercity Eliminator, 3 black, 3/3. When it ETBs, you can sack an artifact or creature. When you do, exile target creature and opponent controls. And putting my money where my mouth is, Night Drinker Moroi, 3 and a black for the 4/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you lose 3 life, and as disguise, black as my number 2.
I am excited for this Twitter poll. I am excited for this
I'm
Twitter
less
poll.
excited about the Twitter poll and more excited to just see how the card plays out.
Oh, winning is way better than playing with Magic cards. I mean, so I think one of the things, speaking of uncommons and potential differences with play boosters down the road, like, so white really deep at common, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the uncommons a little less
does that
so.
matter now in the world of
Yeah,
play
that's
boosters?
what I'm saying. Like, so black's uncommons are banger after banger after banger after banger, which could like significantly boost black as a color.
Such a good point, because I had been thinking about that exact thing. I was like, man, black's commons are kind of stinky, like beyond the removal spells. Like, I don't like any of black threats.
But it's got
really
great creatures at uncommon.
Right?
Premium creatures at uncommon.
And so I guess we don't quite know. The other thing that we haven't, we may talk about this a little later on. I'm mostly saying this just to inform you, because I associate this with you the most, is the fact that there's a common of every color in draft boosters.
But that's no longer true, right?
That's no longer true in play boosters, right? So you could be like, oh, there's no blue common in the pack. Someone took it. Ta-da. That's not going to be the case going into draft as we know it now with play boosters. There's only guaranteed 4 colors of the 5 spread across the commons. So that's another thing to like sort of toss into the mix about play boosters. It's interesting to see like what the rarity shift is going to do for draft.
Yeah. Moving on to the red commons. In the number 1 slot, I've got Galvanize. That's the 1 in a red instant, deal 3. If you've drawn 2 or more cards, it deals 5 instead. That card's incredible. Number 2 slot, Person of Interest. A little sus here. This is 3 in red for a 2/2 common. When it ETBs, you suspect it, and create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token as well that is not suspected. So I really like that as 2 bodies for 4 mana, one of which has Menace. And then the number 3 slot, I've got Shock, red instant, deal 2 damage to any target.
I have the 2 removal spells in the same spots, Galvanize 1, Shock 3, but I have my build around boy, Gearbane Orangutan, 2 in red for a 2/2 ape with reach. When ETBs, choose 1, destroy up to 1 target artifact, or sack an artifact. If you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Gearbane Orangutan. I'm all in for the build around life with the Gearbanes.
That's fair. It feels hard for that to be a number 2 common to me, because it's one archetype only, presumably, right? It is only a blue-red card.
I don't think that's, but my thought is that that's not true. Like, I think there's enough clues running around. I think this is just my take is that this is a deck.
Okay, that's fair. All right, moving on to the red uncommons. Maybe this is not true anymore. My number 1 is Case of the Burning Mass, or was prior to you talking me off the ledge with it.
Yeah.
So that's the case that deals 3 damage. To solve it, 3 or more sources you control dealt damage. And then when it's solved, you can sack it to exile 3. Choose one of them to play this turn. In the number 2 slot, I've got Torch the Witness. This is red X for a sorcery. Deals twice X damage to target creature. If excess damage was dealt to that creature this way, investigate. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and switch those for sure. Yep. Torch is definitely better than Case.
Torch just seems busted to me. I'm obsessed with that card. I'm also obsessed with Cornered Crook as my number 2 red uncommon. It's 4 in red for a 5/4. When it ETBs, you can sack an artifact. When you do, deals 3 damage to any target.
Yeah, and you had Torch as number 1. I like your 2
yeah.
better than mine. That's what it should be. It should be Torch and Crook.
Moving on to green, I have Nervous Gardener as my number 1. 1 in a green 2/2 with Disguise Green. When it's turned face up, search your library for a land card with a basic land type. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Number 2, Loxodon Eavesdropper, 3 in a green 3/3. When it ETBs, investigate. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, Loxodon Eavesdropper gets +1/+1 and gains vigilance until end of turn. Also got good types as a detective. And my number 3, I have Bite Down on Crime, 3 in a green sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you can collect evidence 6. Costs 2 less to cast if evidence was collected. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control.
Yeah, I'm kind of viewing Bite Down on Crime in a new light, like just right now. It's live look into my brain.
Wow.
I think I was thinking that this was pretty clunky and that it was going to be hard to collect evidence. Like the collect evidence needing to make this 2 mana was a downside. I kind of think this might be like bargain on this card. That
Yeah,
collect evidence might be
bargain.
good on this, and that you're going to want to be able to collect evidence to trigger your collect evidence payoffs through the green fight
I
spell.
also think you kind of just sold me. I mean, I know you're not in on disguise, but you sold me last week on like you can just play a disguise creature and like they're largely not. I mean, yes, there are some ways to get around it, but they're largely not going to be able to mess with your creature if you're reaching out with a ward 2.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, my green commons, Nervous Gardener number 1. Also, number 2, Topiary Panther. This is the 4GG 6/5 trample basic
This
land
is a
cycler.
take. I like it though.
I mean, I don't know. I think green really looks like it wants to do multicolor good stuff things, like and go to the late game. And I think Panther's going to be part of that. And then I think Loxodon Eavesdropper is my number 3. That's the elephant that investigates on ETB. I kind of want to get Bite Down on Crime somewhere in there, though. I don't know what I would kick out. Probably has to be Panther. Probably has to be the Panther hot take.
It's just hard to like because Panther is like I don't know what is it, an 80-20, 90-10 split card? Like you're cycling it most of the time. Hard to imagine that being a high pick.
Yeah.
Looking at the uncommons, I did that. Like this was after looking at your grade difference, even though we kept it in the conversation. I do have hard hitting question number 1: single green sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. And in the number 2 spot, I have Green Belt Radical, 3 and a green for a 4/4 with disguise, 5GG. When it's turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Creatures you control gain trample until end of turn.
I've got the same number 1 as you, hard-hitting question, the removal spell. And then number 2, Glint Weaver. Love it. 7 mana for the 3/3 reach. ETBs, you distribute 3 +1/+1 counters, then gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control.
And we debated about whether to put in some of the, like, do we want to rank multicolored cards? Do we want to talk about, I do think it's worth talking about the hybrid commons in some sense, like just shouting out what our top ones are because they're so flexible, right? Because they can go in multiple decks.
They're going to be some of the best commons in the whole set, I think.
That's what I think too. And there's quite a gap. Like some of, like, if you look at our grades, like some of these we gave like in the B range, and then some of them we put in the D range. Like some of them are just bangers and some just don't matter in our estimation.
Yeah, and the bigger issue is some of the ones that don't matter are in the archetypes that want to care about disguising things. That's the bigger issue to me. Yeah. I think those archetypes should have gotten some of the better ones.
Right. So I've shouted this card out already, but my number 1 and we're going to give our top 3 multicolor commons. My number 1 is Dogwalker, red-white for a 3/1 with vigilance. It has disguise for Boros, and when it's turned face up, you make 2 tapped 1/1 white dog creature tokens. My number 2 is Gadget Technician, 2 blue-red for a 3/2. When it ETBs or is turned face up, make a 1/1 colorless Slapster artifact creature token with flying. Has disguise for Is It hybrid. And my number 3 is Fairy Snoop, 1 blue-black for a 1/4 flyer. Has disguise for 1 Demir, and when it's turned face up, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the other into your graveyard.
Yeah, I've got those same 3 in a slightly different order. I've got Gadget Technician 1, that's the blue-red, Dogwalker, Boros number 2, and Fairy Snoop blue-black number 3. Also wanted to shout out Sanguine Savior as like the 4th, I think, really good one.
Yes.
This is 1 white-black for a 2/1 flying lifelink with disguise for white-black. And whenever it's turned face up, another target creature you control gains a lifelink until end of turn.
This card's awesome.
Card's really good. Like I could see it being better than some of the others. Mm-hmm. It is in the same tier as those other 3.
Those 4, yes, I think are in a cut above the rest. I kind of think that like the Is It and the Boros ones, I would put those as like S tier, then Demir and Orzhov as A tier. But yeah, those top 4 for sure for me. Well, we've collected the evidence. Are you ready to come to a conclusion here, Ben?
The conclusion I'm coming to is I'm really excited about Murders at Karlov Manor. I mean, that's new format time. It's hard to not be excited, but I am really looking forward to pre-releasing next Friday. And even more than that, I am looking forward to doing some in-pod testing for you for the PT. I really want to break this format open. I think it's going to be really cool.
I'm doing a couple in-pod drafts later tonight with Team Sanctum of All, so I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully the crash course can fuel me with some information. But yeah, and we'll have to figure out what we want to do next week. Like I'll probably have some in-pod, probably both of us, because you're going to be helping out. We'll have some in-pod drafting, maybe playing on redacted site before the cards are available on Arena. And then we'll have our pre-release this weekend. And then I don't know. I was thinking maybe we'll do a little 25 Arena Cube takes or something. If we don't feel like we have enough to chat about this format next week. But I am also really excited, and I will say really nervous about playing this format at the high level.
I mean, it's all upside,
It's
right?
all upside.
Like, you qualified, you're there. It's going to be a blast. No one's expecting you to do well. So if you don't, like, not, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You're playing against like the LSVs of the world, like who've been there and done it. Like, very hard to do well at your first PT. Like, not a knock against you as a Magic player. I think you are excellent, but it largely feels like a free roll to me. And maybe I'm just projecting onto you. I would just be over the moon to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I hope that by the time the trip to Chicago rolls around, I have that perspective. But right now I'm just all jitters.
You're going to be great. All right. Good place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thank you so much to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over there for any and all purchases, please use checkout code LOL all caps to let them know we sent you there. And more importantly, to get 5% off of anything you purchase. And you can find all of our content on our website, lordsoflimited.com. Links to our Ben. We're going to get a tier list here.
Oh, we'll have a tier list for this for sure.
There will be a tier list, and you better believe that the Moroi is going to be high up there
in the D range.
In the D range. So you can find our tier list for this set, for past sets. You can find our episode backlog. You can find links to our YouTube channel, as well as our respective Twitch streams. All of that available on lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, you want to tell us how bad Night Drinker Moroi is, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.